very necessary check on an erratic and unreliable White House.
Voices from the States, part of C-SPAN's 50 Capitals tour.
In Minnesota, candidates in 2 congressional races sat down for interviews on a local PBS news program. It begins with the candidates in the 2nd District, where incumbent Republican Jason Lewis is running against Democrat Angie Craig. Then it's the 3rd District candidates, Republican Eric Paulson and Democrat Dean Phillips. C-SPAN is your primary source for Campaign 2018.
Almanac is a production of Twin Cities PBS for the stations of Minnesota Public Television Association.
Special program for you tonight. It's all politics. Live in studio, we'll have debates featuring candidates in the 2nd and 3rd congressional districts. Jason Lewis versus Angie Craig, Eric Paulson, and Dean Phillips. And then Mary LaHammer will profile the Senate race, contrasting Amy Klobuchar and Jim Newberger.
Activists are gearing up for a high-stakes election. We'll talk to the candidates in the other U.S. Senate race.
I am really focused right now on the 2018 elections.
I'm 100% Minnesota. Okay. That's who I am.
That's coming up on Almanac.
Almanac is made possible by members of this public television station. Support is also provided by Great River Energy, providing electricity and related services to 28 co-ops in Minnesota, a Touchstone Energy cooperative. Flint Hills Resources, producing transportation fuels for Minnesota and the Upper Midwest at its Rosemont refinery. Health Partners, with 60 years of experience helping plan members achieve their well-being goals. Health Partners is your trusted Medicare partner. Delta Dental of Minnesota Foundation, making dental care possible for Minnesotans in need. deltadentalmn.org/TPT. The Shakopee Midwakaton Sioux Community, one of the top philanthropists in Minnesota and the largest tribal donor in America. And Education Minnesota, the voice for professional educators and students throughout the state. More at educationminnesota.org.
Hello, I'm Kathy Wurzer, and welcome to a special night of congressional debates. It's all part of our In It Together initiative here at Twin Cities PBS that features reports and conversations exploring the values that underpin our democracy. A special welcome to audiences joining us on C-SPAN and Minnesota Public Radio. Let's jump into our conversation with the 2 candidates who want to represent Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District.
Hello, I'm Eric Escala, and here's a quick geography lesson. The 2nd Congressional District includes the southern suburbs of the Twin Cities and points south and east. The district is marked by Eagan to the north, Zumbrota to the south, Belle Plaine to the west, and Wabasha to the east. Incumbent Republican Congressman Jason Lewis is once again being challenged by Democrat Angie Craig, and they are here with us in the studio.
Now, while we call this a debate, it's really a conversation. There are no stopwatches, no opening or closing statements, no coins are flipped to determine order of anything. So here are the candidates. Jason Lewis made his living for decades on talk radio. 2 years ago, the Republican was elected to Congress. Angie Craig is the Democrat in the race. The former healthcare industry executive lost to Jason Lewis in the same matchup 2 years ago. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Kathy, you're right.
It's a pleasure.
Great.
Well, Representative Lewis, back in 2016, when you two debated on Minnesota Public Radio, you saw Congress as a check on, quote, the imperial presidency. And I'm thinking you might have figured that we're thinking that maybe Hillary Clinton might be president. How's Congress doing in the role of being a check on President Trump?
Well, you know, I think we did 16 CRAs taking back Article 1 power.
Now, what's the CRA?
A Congressional Review Act that goes in and says if the executive branch does this unilaterally, they can't. We make the law, they enforce the law. We did 16 of those and undid about $4 billion of executive branch rules in the first 60 days of the 115th. So I think that is taking back Article 1 power and a check on the executive, no matter who it is.
It doesn't sound, though, to some people that Congress is really, though, a true check on the president in terms of no one's really, as you might heard, you know, standing up to him and some of his things he might say.
Well, Kathy, there's a difference between style and substance, and I think we get confused with that. On the substance, if you're talking about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which gives families in the 2nd District $3,000 in extra income, I'm not going to stand up against that. I led the way getting that done. If you're talking about style, would I do everything the way the president does? Probably not, as I've said before. But we got elected to cut taxes, a lower, flatter code to get the economy going again, and that's something I'm glad to work with the administration on.
Angie Craig, probably the ultimate check on a president would be a vote to impeach him or her. Would you vote to impeach President Trump if you're elected?
Well, look, I think there's an independent investigation being led by a former FBI director who happens to be a Republican. So I would want to wait, obviously, until we have any results of that investigation. We have a foreign power that is accused of interfering with an election. No matter who that benefited or hurt, I think we have to have a full and fair investigation. I disagree with the congressman on the substance of the administration and congressional Republicans. In fact, you know, the administration is refusing to defend the pre-existing condition clause in the ACA right now, down in a Texas case. And this is, again, another example of he's not willing to stand up to the president, voting to really prohibit pre-existing condition protections in this country.
Actually, the bill we tried to pass in Congress explicitly protected those conditions you're talking about. The act actually said nothing in this act shall be construed to deny pre-existing conditions.
But how do you do that if you don't have young and healthy people spreading the burden around a little bit?
Let me just finish, please.
Sure.
That is exactly what we want to do, is let the rates lower so young and healthy people get back into the pool to subsidize the old and the sick or the infirm. The Affordable Care Act said, well, we're going to jack up premiums so high, the only way people will buy them is if we have a mandate. And that's not the best way to do it. I like a high-risk, invisible pool to do it. They like high premiums to do it. That's not working. But I will tell you this. We went back to Kennedy-Kassenbaum, Angie, in our legislation. Kennedy-Kassenbaum said, look, if you are up to date on your coverage, no one can be denied pre-existing conditions. But if you lapse, and I don't think Ted Kennedy was lacking in compassion, if you lapse, then they could charge you a bit more. Same language as Kennedy-Kassenbaum.
You're not a Medicare for All person.
I am not, period. But the American Health Care Act was a terrible bill. It threw millions of Americans off their health care. It added an age tax on 50 to 64-year-olds. That's why AARP opposed it. And at the end of the day, the congressman is entitled to his own opinion, but he's not entitled to his own facts. The MacArthur Amendment in the AHCA actually gave states the ability to waive pre-existing condition protections and charge people more. That's why you had to go get the Upton Amendment after that to try to offset some of that. So
the language is the same as Kennedy-Kassenbaum. 63 days, you're up to date on your premiums. You can't be denied pre-existing conditions. You can't be charged more for pre-existing conditions. We actually passed a 1332 waiver to get out from under the Obamacare law that no one other than Angie Craig had more to do with getting in Minnesota when she was a corporate lobbyist lobbying to get Obamacare in, then lobbying to undercut the tax to fund Obamacare. We had to pass a waiver that she talks about, the 1332 waiver, so we could, in fact, have a reinsurance pool in Minnesota. The reason premiums are flat is because of that 1332 waiver that we passed in the 115th.
What about you lobbied for?
The congressman knows I was never a lobbyist. Did I support health care reform in this country? You bet I did. And I think we've got to get back to a time in this country where we are willing to work together on bipartisan fixes. This is what I think we should do, Eric. I think we should move forward, keep pre-existing condition protections in this country. Let's put forward on a bipartisan basis a federal reinsurance program. Let's give long-term outlook to cost subsidies. I also think we ought to introduce a buy-in to Medicare. If you want to purchase a plan, just like you would from United Healthcare or from Blue Cross, buy into Medicare. And then finally, and this is the most important thing, this whole conversation over the last decade has been been about the cost of health insurance. We finally need to get back to the cost of health care. I grew up in my own family without access to health insurance for part of my childhood. I spent over 20 years in health care, and I believe I have something to
contribute. But Angie, you told NPR you wanted to work toward a single-payer system. You actually told NPR Radio that. Now you're saying, well, I'm not for Medicare for all, the $32 trillion socialized medicine scheme. You say, I just want a Medicare buy-in. There are 5 proposals out there for Medicare buy-in. Which one do you support? And by the way, you will dilute Medicare and end it as we know it for seniors if you allow everybody else to buy in.
The Congressman knows I have never supported Medicare for all. And in fact, the experts say we could strengthen Medicare by having healthier people, younger people in the patient pool.
Do we agree that no one thinks health care is better since 2010 and Obamacare? When Angie was running her PAC, she was doling out money to pass that law and then doling out money and doling out.
It's better.
Not the people who are paying premiums that are 4 times as high.
Let me approach this from another side. We talk about insurance cost and premiums and out of pocket and all that. But what about the actual cost of the treatments?
Right.
Now,
medical devices, for instance?
Every medical provider is well lobbied and well donored up in Washington. And who's going to take a haircut financially to lower the cost of the care?
Well,
Anybody got a shot on that?
I'd like to answer that question first, because I think the only thing standing in the way of strengthening Medicare right now is Congress. If Congress would get out of the way, we could negotiate prices on prescription drugs under Medicare. I believe fundamentally, and I'm telling you, some of the folks that perhaps in the industry may not agree, but we need to get after the cost. This volume-based healthcare system we live in, where we are rewarding physicians and hospitals, and yes,
but how do you get to
it? Pharmacy benefit managers already negotiate prices in the private sector.
In the private sector, we're not talking about private. We're talking about Medicare. That's a very different conversation.
Right. But in Medicare and Medicaid, Angie, the costs are about 40% below the market because of explicit price controls already. And what that does is it dries up providers and clinics and hospitals, and you get a queuing up and rationing. Now, I don't know if you're advocating price controls on medical devices, but after you got Obamacare passed and then tried to undercut the tax to pay for it, you received more money from the medical device industry than any other candidate in the country.
Answer that.
We'll move on out.
The congressman voted to repeal the tax that I advocated that we repeal. We have exactly the same position as every other member of the delegation in Minnesota.
Except I didn't support Obamacare, and the main funding mechanism was the medical device tax, which he then lobbied on.
You didn't support health care reform in this. The bottom line is you had 2 years to get health care fixed. You failed. You had the House, the Senate, you had the White House. You couldn't get it done.
And right now premiums are flat.
Your time's up.
Angie, premiums are flat thanks to our waiver.
Let's move on. Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
Yes.
From what I gather, it's a little more than $3,000 per person tax relief to family of 4 in the 2nd district. With the deficit and the debt that this is creating or helping create, are you going to have to go after entitlements next, or will economic growth help secure Social Security, or where do you see that going?
We need entitlement reform, but the first thing you have to have is growth. Payroll taxes are $105 billion more today after the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. That's a good thing when you have growth like that. But I'm not, as Angie is saying, advocating raising taxes on a family of 4 $3,000 when she says she wants to repeal the whole thing, what you said, Angie. And so I think the Tax Cut and Jobs Act has been a great success. You have to have growth to do any of this. Now, I will say this. We're going to get more revenue. Federal income tax receipts are already higher under the new lower rates than they were last year under the higher rates. 1% growth is $3 trillion more in revenue over 10 years. You have to have growth, just like John Kennedy proposed growth, like Reagan proposed growth, even Bill Clinton proposed growth by cutting the capital gains rate.
Well, go ahead.
Well, Jason throws out a lot of facts and figures, but I want to start with this one. Jason voted with the Republican Party over 96% of the time since he's been a member of Congress from Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District. Tax reform, this bill was about who we help. And what I've said from the beginning is trickle-down economics doesn't work. I support tax reform, tax cuts for the middle class and for small businesses. That's not what this was. This was over 80% of a tax cut for large corporations and the top 5% of income earners.
You're not for a corporate tax cut? cut?
I'm not. I think we should have doubled down, tripled down on tax cuts for the middle class.
I love that figure because you assume.
Let her finish. Let her finish.
Sure.
This whole thing is about who we prioritize in this country, and I would prioritize the middle class, and the congressmen and congressional Republicans have prioritized large corporations.
Let's see. The tax reduction isn't working. The lowest unemployment rate since 1969. After-tax income 6% higher. 7 million job openings, more job openings than job seekers. It's not working.
The deficit is $779
We're talking about
billion.
economic growth. We were at 1.9% during the Obama era when he raised taxes, and you know what happened? The debt doubled because we didn't have any growth with high tax rates. We cut taxes, and now we're growing. I think this has been a great success. One more thing on her figure. You have to assume that the individual tax cuts expire to get her figure she just used. We already voted to extend them, which blows your figure out of the water.
Well, 64% of Americans in a poll just last week said they haven't felt more money in their pocket as a result of the Republican tax cuts.
Okay.
So I just don't think it's true. And at the end of the day, what we did is we added $2 trillion to the federal deficit, almost $2 trillion. My kids, your kids are going to have to pay for that. And now they're talking about, and he used the word entitlement reform. Medicare and Social Security are not entitlements. People earn those benefits through a lifetime of hard work and by paying into those programs. And
that's why we shouldn't end Medicare as we know it by messing around with socialized medicine schemes that would destroy it. But one thing she did say that really it needs to be explained, and that is this $2 trillion in more debt. That was predicated upon 1.5% growth. So the CBO says we're going to grow, 1.9% growth over the next 10 years. That was their figure of this $1.5 trillion extra debt. We're already growing.
They're in my ear. I got to get going here.
Actually, you know what? Do you want to do the ads?
Yeah,
Let's do the ads.
Facebook. We took some ads off your Facebook accounts. These are your ads, not outside groups. And Angie Craig, this one you say that Jason Lewis has gone District of Columbia on us. Here it is.
Gone Washington. Definition: a congressman who takes half his money from special interests and puts them first. Example: Jason Lewis. Angie Craig knows we've got to close the book on politics as usual. That means making all campaign contributions open and transparent, toughening the penalties for political corruption. And if Congress doesn't do their job, they don't get paid.
I'm Angie Craig, and I approve this message because Washington's got to start working for people again.
What's your plan with a Supreme Court Citizens United ruling that seems to equate money with speech?
Well, I would, first of all, support a constitutional amendment, and I'd ask the congressman to join me, a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. That would take this dark, anonymous money out of all sides of a campaign, and I would be 100% supportive of that. Beyond that, my Clean Campaigns program would say if you're going to spend anonymous money, you can't do that. You have to disclose who is donating the money. We already do that voluntarily on my campaign website, everybody, but the congressman won't join me in this constitutional
amendment. Last quarter, Angie raised 3 times as much as I did. She's setting records for hard money and outside money. Here's the Minnesota 2nd District outside spending from ProPublica. Here's my outside spending right there. Here's Angie Craig's. 3 there, and all the way down here from Michael Bloomberg, from Environmental Defense Action, trying to undo the Enbridge pipeline, from Sierra Club. You are dwarfing me by 3, 4, 5-fold on money. If you don't like money in politics, don't take it, Angie.
Well, I tell you where my money's coming from. 132,000 people have contributed an average of $32 to my campaign before we filed the last filing. So you know where my money's coming from? It's
out of state. That's where it's coming from. 50% of it's out of state.
Who would like to see you not be their member of Congress
through non-transparent Act Blue. That's
we looked at Jason Lewis's website, and he wants to take on the Met Council. Let's take a look.
All politicians want to do is play games, lob attacks, and hope you don't notice where the money is going. That's why I've led the fight to stop the corrupt bureaucrats at the Met Council. They raise taxes on our families and our neighborhoods for projects benefiting downtown Minneapolis. They weren't elected and they aren't accountable. But Angie Craig still wants to give them more of your hard-earned money. I'm Jason Lewis, and I approve this message because I'll never stop fighting for you.
You would think that the Met Council would not be a congressional issue. Why don't you dive into that?
They're a federally compliant MPO. Metropolitan Planning Organization. To be federally compliant, you have to do this and this and this, like have an elected board member. We are the largest metropolitan planning organization without an elected board member. We're the only one that can independently raise taxes. So all I said is you got to come in compliance with all of the other MPOs in the country. When I offered this as an amendment on the floor, nobody opposed because every other MPO in the country has at least one elected board member. So I said, let's have an amendment to have one elected board member to be federally compliant. I would think Angie would join me in that. That's a very modest proposal. And now, thankfully, the FTA is actually reviewing it because the Met Council got grandfathered in 1991, being the only one without an elected board member.
Which is going to add? Kathy, I have no problem if we want to change the way the Met Council works. But I think that ought to be up to Minnesota. So the congressman shouldn't force us to change. You go lobby the state legislature and change it. Provide for staggered boards.
They're federally compliant
Provide
MPOs.
for elected officials. That's fantastic. But, you know, that's a Minnesota decision. It's just odd to me that you want to get involved in Minnesota's business.
Because going back to 1962, to be designated federally compliant, you had to do this and this and this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the federal funds. So all we're doing is having the Met Council come into compliance with every other MPO in the country.
I have another issue here. We're going to slide into this. Okay, CNN today dove into your past radio comments, and it seems that you were less than sympathetic to women who alleged to have been sexually harassed. I mean, specifically, and you were talking in 2012 about the former presidential candidate Herman Cain, who was accused of harassment. And the quote is, how many women at some point in their life have a man come on to them, place their hand on their shoulder, or maybe even their thigh, kiss them, and they would rather not have that happen. But is that really something that's going to be seared in your memory that you'll need therapy for? You'll never get over it. Come on, she wasn't raped. Now, in this era of Me Too, how's your thinking changed? You know, last cycle, they got me for slavery. I was pro-slavery, apparently. I was also pro-heroin usage. Now they're coming after me for this 2 weeks in front of an election. Would you say the same thing today?
Well, the radio tape thing is the gift that keeps on giving. But if we want to talk about sexual harassment, talk about Judge Brett Kavanaugh and what they've done to that man. I will not support opening up that investigation.
But what would you say the same thing today?
I say sexual harassment law needs to be better defined. Much more better defined, because what you don't want people able to make false accusations, and that's what my concern was on Clarence Thomas, on Brett Kavanaugh. That's just as bad as a sexual harassment case if somebody's falsely accused. And don't take my word for it. Take liberal lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who was very, very opposed to what happened to Brett Kavanaugh.
Angie Craig.
Well, at the end of the day, I've said from the start that I don't think Jason's way of thinking represents mainstream Minnesota values, but that's up to the voters of the 2nd Congressional District to decide. I personally am more offended by his votes against Minnesota families, giving a huge tax break to large corporations, gutting the Affordable Care Act with the ACA. So, look, it's, I'll let him respond.
Well, I do think actions speak louder than words. If we're very concerned about this issue, and it is an important issue, if you're taking money from Garrison Keillor and you didn't give it back, if you're campaigning with Al Franken, took his money, if you're campaigning with Keith Ellison or Dan Schoen, actions speak louder than words. They're talking about attacking my free speech rights and my ability to have an opinion on current law. I'm talking about taking money from people you probably shouldn't be taking money from.
Real quick.
Well, look, I spent years as the head of HR for a major Fortune 500 company. I have literally led a team that had responsibility for sexual harassment investigations. And I believe 100% that for the movement for women to be heard is important, but it's also incredibly important that we have open investigations and due process as part of this.
Now, Saudi Arabia
I agree on due process, that's for sure.
Saudi Arabia is a multi-billion-dollar arms client of the United States, and I'm sure that the domestic arms producers in America do very well with the Saudi Arabian buying our military stuff. But Saudi Arabia fires 5 top officials, arrests 18 Saudis after saying Jamal Khashoggi was killed in a fight at the consulate there.
He was questioned to death.
Do you want to cut arms sales, or what kind of sanctions, if any?
Well, I think we need to get serious about Sunni extremism coming from Saudi Arabia. We all remember the hijackers. Most of them were Sunnis. And so we have to get serious about Saudi Arabia and the Wahhabist school. And I said that in 2016.
What kind of sanctions would you like?
Well, we'll see what the investigation reveals. But something, that's for certain. I do believe that whether it's Qatar, UAE, or the Sunni countries, including Saudi Arabia, they are responsible for promoting the jihad around the globe. If you take a look at all the terrorist attacks, they're almost all Sunni. And we seem to have a bit of a blind eye there. So I'm very concerned about this, and that's what I said in 2016.
Angie Craig?
Well, I think at the end of the day, America, we need to do our own investigation of what happened here. We can't just take the results from Turkey or believe the word of Saudi Arabia. And so I think we need to have an independent investigation, see what unfolds there. And I'm very, very concerned about the rhetoric in this country and other places with respect to journalists. I mean, this is about democracy. Journalists have a job to do, and some of the hateful rhetoric around journalists is very, very concerning.
Well, I'm very concerned about the hateful rhetoric coming from Maxine Waters and Hillary Clinton saying she'll have civility once she takes power back. We had 2 Minnesota Republicans attacked this week. My family's been threatened. I couldn't hold a town hall without getting with the Capitol Police first. People trespass on my lawn. Take Action Minnesota, which supported you, and nobody in the Democrat Party is renouncing this. That is the total chaos that's going on. Have
your lawn signs survived, or are you getting...
No, we've had a few that didn't survive on our campaign.
Gee, mine have been
But look, I think
the
congressman is confused. I'm not sure he remembers who he's running against. So my name is Angie Craig. I live in Eagan. I'm not any other Democrat, and I want him to just focus on my policy
renounce the rhetoric then. Do you agree with Hillary Clinton that civility should only come back if the Democrats take power?
I believe that Angie Craig is running against Jason Lewis, and I should respond to my own comments, not anyone else's.
Well, I don't agree with it, so there's a difference.
I'm curious as to who you'll vote for House Speaker. What do you want to have as House Speaker?
I haven't decided yet. It's going to be Jim Jordan or Kevin McCarthy.
You like them? Come on.
Well, no, I haven't decided yet. I'm going to listen to both of them.
How about Pelosi if you come back in control?
I've been very clear that I'm open to new leadership in the party, and I want to take a good look at who's running at each level of leadership. And the bottom line, I would like to see some members from the Midwest run for leadership positions, because that to me would give us our best values.
Of the 17 Republican candidates for president at the start of the process last cycle, who did you back coming out of the barn? Anybody?
I didn't back anybody specifically. I liked Rand a lot. As I mentioned on this program 2 years ago. But look, when it comes to this president, I will support him on good policies. And whether it's controlling the border, which my opponent does not want to control, she's for sanctuary cities and open borders, I back the president.
Were you Sanders or Clinton?
I didn't endorse in that process. My supporters were on both sides of that. And I just remind you, he has a 96% voting record with Republicans.
And 74% with Amy Klobuchar, if you can count all the recorded votes.
Thank you both. Good luck down the trail.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
You bet. Thanks, Kathy. You bet.